Amid the thick darkness that blanketed Windsor Forest, Royal Lodge, the residence of Prince Andrew, lay in absolute silence. Then a high-pitched wail pierced the night, shattering the stillness. The ambulance siren echoed through the fog, its red and blue lights sweeping across the ancient brick walls, reflecting off the darkened windows. No one knew what was happening inside the grand estate, only glimpsing shadows moving hastily in the flickering light. Shortly before midnight, emergency services were calling following a frantic phone call. When they forced open the door to Andrew's study, they found the prince unconscious on the floor. A half-drunk glass of wine sat on the desk. A phone lay fallen by the chair, its screen displaying an unsent message. Every small detail added to the suffocating tension of the scene. News spread rapidly across Windsor, and within hours, Buckingham Palace released a brief statement. Prince Andrew is receiving specialized medical care. No further explanation, no images, and unknown to the public. At that very moment, King Charles and Queen Camilla had left the palace in silence, heading straight to Royal Lodge. The media immediately demanded answers. What was truly happening behind those cold walls? Why did the palace respond with such speed yet such discretion? And what prompted Queen Camilla, normally a distant observer, to appear in person that very night? Was this merely a routine accident, or was a hidden secret and being carefully concealed? To understand, we must return to the night of October 28th, a night when the British royal family once again faced the shadow of fate. Royal Lodge, Windsor. October 28th, 11:07 p.m. The historic estate, surrounded by oak forests, lay shrouded in dense mist. Inside, warm yellow light spilled from the ground floor study. On the desk sat a cold cup of tea, an open file, and a pen tipped at the edge of a sheet as if hastily dropped. Prince Andrew sat in an old leather armchair, rubbing his forehead, breathing heavily. Weeks of silent heartache had been tormenting him, yet he worked late into the night, partly to pass the time, partly to escape the loneliness that pressed in. The only sound in the room was the clock on the wall, steady, cold, and unyielding. Almost the entire house was empty. The staff had gone home hours earlier. Sarah Ferguson, his ex-wife, was in the rear annex, reviewing letters for her charitable work. Despite years of divorce, the two still lived on the same grounds, like two spirits trapped in memories they could not close. Around 11:15 p.m., Sarah heard a faint noise, as if something had fallen to the floor. At first, she ignored it. Seconds later, the sound of a chair toppling echoed through the hall. Instinct made her leap up and rush down the corridor to the study. The door swung open, and the sight froze her in place. Andrew lay slumped beside the desk, his face pale, left hand clenched over his chest, his breath weak and shallow. The broken cup of tea lay spilled across the floor, liquid mingling with shards of porcelain. Sarah stood for a moment, stunned, then rushed forward, shaking his shoulders. Andrew, can you hear me?" But there was no answer. Trembling, she dialed emergency services. "This is Royal Lodge, Windsor. Prince Andrew. He's collapsed. Please, come immediately." Her voice wavered, a mixture of tears and strained composure. Within 10 minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the night at the main gate. Red and blue lights swept across the ancient brick walls, reflecting in the dark windows. Security staff opened the gates as paramedics rushed in, carrying a stretcher through the stone-floored hallway. They found Andrew unconscious, with a weak pulse and an irregular heartbeat. Sarah stepped back against the wall, hand covering her mouth. The room was thick with the scent of cold tea and anxiety. A medic placed the defibrillator on his chest, delivering 2 electric shocks in succession. Andrew's body twitched slightly, then went limp again. Sarah sobbed, voice trembling. "Is he alive?" The doctor replied tersely, "We're doing everything we can." Royal Lodge, once a place of quiet solitude, now echoed with hurried footsteps in the hum of machinery. One staff member recalled never having seen the house so chaotic since the passing of Queen Elizabeth. But tonight in Iran, there were no royals, no ceremony, only real fear and disorder. By the time the ambulance departed, the clock was approaching midnight. The great gates closed behind it, leaving a mist-shrouded drive marked with tire tracks. Sarah stood frozen, watching the vehicle vanish into the fog, feeling as if she were being drawn into a void. Memories flooded her twin, their first meeting at an Ascot riding event, the dazzling wedding in 1986, the tabloid headlines, and the scandals that tore them apart. Though their marriage had ended long ago, an unusual bond remained between them. Not love, but obligation and empathy. She had once said, "Andrew may lose everything, but I will not let him lose his dignity." Tonight, those words echoed in her mind, stark and chilling. At King Edward VII Hospital, where the ambulance had delivered him, senior medical staff were mobilized immediately. When Andrew was wheeled into the emergency room, his blood pressure had dropped to a dangerous low. His heart flatlined for several seconds before restarting after a third shock from the defibrillator. Outside, Sarah sat on a cold bench, the corridor lights, nurses' footsteps, and polite inquiries blurring around her. She said nothing, staring at the closed doors of the emergency room. Minutes later, her phone rang. A royal aide inquired about his condition. Sarah replied tersely, "He's still under treatment," and hung up, saying no more. Back at Royal Lodge, the scene remained frozen in time as it had when Andrew collapsed. The cold cup of tea, toppled chair, and scattered documents littered the floor. On the desk, a hastily scribbled note still read, "Meeting postponed, 29th October." No one knew who he had planned to meet, or about what. Around 2 a.m., Sarah returned home after hearing that Andrew had survived the immediate crisis. Entering the study, she looked around, trying to comprehend what had just occurred. Moonlight filtered through the window, casting pale streaks across the floor. She bent down to pick up an old photograph near the desk, a snapshot of the two of them with their daughters on a holiday in Scotland. Everyone smiled, except Andrew, whose gaze was distant. Sarah sat down, holding the photo for a long moment. She realized that for years, Andrew had lived caught between two worlds, one of past glory, the other of harsh reality, and now his own body was rebelling, as if it could bear no more of this silence. Outside, the fog remained thick, enveloping the estate. The clock struck again, steady as the heartbeat of a house long accustomed to loneliness. That night, Royal Lodge witnessed something few could imagine. A man who once stood in the brightest spotlight in Britain now fighting for each breath, quietly, vulnerably, and painfully. No one knew what news the dawn would bring for the royal family. But one thing was certain. After the night of October 28th, Royal Lodge would never be quiet again. It had become the scene of fear, the fear of losing a fragment of royal memory, and of a man who had once symbolized an era of grandeur. The relationship between King Charles and his brother Andrew had long since cooled after years of scandals that rocked the monarchy. Since Andrew was withdrawn from public duties, the two met only at formal events, shaking hands as strangers. Many believed Charles had cast Andrew out of his circle of trust. So when news of Andrew's collapse reached Buckingham Palace, it was expected that the king would respond with his usual calm silence. But that cold, misty night, a phone call stirred Buckingham Palace, pulling the entire royal family into a storm of worry. The phone rang in Charles's study at 2:00 a.m., a harsh sound in the stillness of the ancient palace, where desk lamps illuminated stacks of royal project files. Charles, who had been struggling with chronic pain and sleepless nights, lifted the receiver. A trembling, urgent voice came through. "Your Majesty, urgent news from Royal Lodge. Prince Andrew has just been admitted to Windsor Hospital." For a moment, Charles said nothing, staring at the walls lined with portraits of ancestors. A chill ran through him. Despite their estrangement, Andrew was still his brother, a companion from childhood through the gardens of Windsor, a fellow witness to royal ceremonies in youth. Now, hearing the news, it felt as though the past had returned to life. Charles immediately called the royal medical team, his voice hoarse with emotion, yet maintaining the composure of a monarch. He demanded constant updates. But before the call ended, the aide added something that made him pause. "Sir, we understand Sarah Ferguson was the one who found him." Charles closed his eyes. The tangled story between Andrew and Sarah, the complexities surrounding them, had returned once more. He knew that if this information leaked, the press would erupt, and that was precisely what the royal family could not afford at this time. Soon after, the echo of footsteps filled Buckingham's long corridors. Princess Anne was the first to arrive, clad in a thick coat, her hair tied back, expression stern. Upon entering the room, she asked directly, "Where have they taken Andrew?" "St. George's Hospital, Windsor." Charles replied softly, his gaze fixed on the now cold cup of tea. Anne let out a long sigh and turned to her brother. "We have to go there immediately. You know how much Andrew's life matters to Mother. No matter what, he is still part of this family." Charles remained silent. He knew Anne was right, but as a king, he also understood that every action he took would be scrutinized by the public. Leaving the palace at midnight just because a younger brother had been stripped of his duties could spark a storm of speculation the royal family was not ready to face. A heavy silence filled the room. The desk lamp cast light over piles of documents, reflecting off the dark wooden surface. Outside, the wind howled through the large windows, making the silk curtains flutter. In that space, even their breaths felt weighty. Then the door creaked open. Camilla entered. She wore a gray silk robe, her hair hastily pinned up, her face showing exhaustion but her eyes cold and unreadable. She said nothing at first, merely glancing at the two siblings before slowly approaching the desk. Her presence made the tense room feel suffocating. The yellow light highlighted her features, creating patches of shadow and brightness that made it difficult to discern any true emotion. Charles shifted slightly, as if to speak, then stopped. Camilla laid a hand lightly on his shoulder, a gesture of comfort, yet her voice carried an undertone of something deeper. "I heard the phone. What's happened?" Anne answered for him. "Andrew, he's just been taken to emergency care." Camilla raised an eyebrow, betraying no emotion. She poured herself a cup of tea from the porcelain pot on the desk, her movements deliberate, precise, almost cold. The soft clink of the spoon against the cup shattered the tense silence. Charles looked at his wife, uncertainty in his eyes. He was caught between two roles, a worried elder brother and a king who could not act purely on emotion. Anne noticed this, her expression tightening with concern. No one spoke further. Only the old clock ticked steadily, each sound cold and precise. Camilla moved slowly to the window, staring out at the mist-shrouded courtyard, her silhouette blurred against the glass, distant and unreachable. In that moment, Charles realized that her mere presence, silent as it was, made everyone in the room feel as though they were standing on an impossible threshold. Anne clenched her hands, her gaze fixed on her brother, yet she said nothing. Charles lowered his head, lost in thought. The room sank into a heavy, palpable silence, so dense that the ticking second hand seemed deafening. And in that darkened air, one thing was understood without words. This conversation, sooner or later, would not end here. Inside Buckingham Palace, the clock struck 3 in the morning. The second hand clicked softly across the vast, velvet-draped corridors. Outside, when the fog was so dense it swallowed the yellow glow of the windows, no one spoke, each step careful and measured. In the king's study, desk lamps lit unfinished documents, the steam rising from cold tea, the air thick with unnamed worry. Anne broke the silence first, having arrived from her private residence, her face showing fatigue from the long journey through the cold night. Her voice was decisive, leaving no room for hesitation. "Father would never forgive us if we left Andrew in that state. You need to go to the hospital now." Charles lifted his head, weary, bloodshot eyes meeting hers. He remained silent for a long moment, as though organizing his jumbled thoughts. A cold draft rattled the curtains, and the antique clock ticked, reminding him that time was slipping away. Finally, Bo, he spoke slowly. I want to go, but is it the right thing, Anne? The whole country is watching my every move. One wrong image, and the media will twist everything. Anne frowned, stepping closer. You are not just a king, Charles. You are a brother. A brother cannot pretend not to know when his sibling lies in a hospital bed. Silence fell again. Footsteps echoed faintly down the corridor. The door opened, and Camilla entered. She wore an ivory silk robe, her hair unkempt, her expression calm. Her gaze swept over both of them, lingering on Charles. The already tense room seemed to constrict further. What's all the fuss about? Camilla asked softly. Yet clearly, Anne turned to face her, unwavering. Prince Andrew is in the hospital. I demand that the king go there immediately. Camilla raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing her features before settling back into composure. She approached the desk, placing a hand gently on Charles's shoulder. In the middle of the night? She asked, her voice low and cool. Do you really think he should be there right now? Anne's tone was firm, sharp. Yes, because it is the right thing to do. Camilla exhaled softly and turned away. Under the yellow light, her expression sharpened, cold and precise. We have to think beyond this, she said. If the press captures images of the king leaving the palace at midnight, what will they write? They'll assume something terrible is happening within the royal family. Tomorrow morning, we'll be swamped with rumors, panic, and sensational headlines. Charles remained silent. He knew she was right in a way, yet the tone of her voice weighed heavily on him. Anne looked at her, eyes flashing with anger. This isn't about appearances, Camilla. This is about a human being. Camilla didn't answer, meeting Anne's gaze with the same icy calm. A few moments of silence passed before she spoke again, each word deliberate and firm. We cannot let the media see the king leaving the palace at midnight just because someone no longer holds an official title. The words fell like lead. Charles glanced at his wife, then at his sister. In that moment, he felt torn in two, one side pulled by the duty of a brother, the other by the obligations of a monarch protecting the royal family's image in a fragile moment. Anne clenched her fists. What did you just say? He is still Charles's brother. He was once a prince, standing alongside us. We may not agree with his past, but he is still family. Camilla remained silent. She did not avert her gaze, yet there was no hint of retracting her words. Charles stood, pacing a few steps around the room as if to escape the suffocating tension. He finally turned, speaking softly. I understand both of you, but I cannot let emotion guide me. If I go, tomorrow every paper will show my picture outside the hospital, and people will question why. Anne's voice trembled with anger. Because you are human. Charles, not a symbol. Someone who feels pain, who worries for his brother. That is what the public will understand. Camilla met Anne's stare, her voice light but chilling. I, however, believe they will not understand. They will only see a weak king, bound by the past. The room seemed to fracture. Anne stood, disappointment etched across her face. She looked at her brother for a long moment before speaking softly. You've changed, Charles. This palace has made you someone else. She turned and left without looking back. The door closed, leaving Charles and Camilla in silence. The clock ticked steadily, dry and unyielding. Charles sank into his chair, head bowed, hands clasped. He said nothing. Camilla stood behind him, her eyes following the mist-covered Buckingham Gardens outside. She whispered, almost to herself, we need to stabilize everything before dawn. Charles did not reply. He simply closed his eyes, exhaling as if aware that, whatever choice he made, nothing could return to what it once was. The conversation in that room ended with no clear resolution, yet everyone understood where the final authority lay, with Camilla. As she quietly left, The chill of the Defiant and the soft rustle of her silk gown trailing across the floor lingered behind, leaving the king alone in the darkness. Outside, the fog thickened. Buckingham Palace lay silent, but inside, a new boundary had been drawn. Between family and duty, between heart and crown. The meeting room remained heavy with tension, each breath seemingly held in check. Charles, Anne, and Camilla sat motionless, glances flicking between them, none daring to speak. Yellow light from the antique chandeliers fell across the weighty wooden table, reflecting on their strained faces. The wall clock ticked evenly, each second a countdown to a decision yet to be made. Anne broke the silence first, her voice firm and resolute. Prince Andrew is in the hospital. I demand that the king go there immediately, not for protocol or titles, but because he is my brother, and it is the responsibility of a brother. Her words were compelling, yet added to the suffocating tension. She sat upright, hands clenched on the table, eyes fixed on Charles, awaiting a sign of agreement. Charles felt torn. He stared at the small map on the table as if it might hold the answer. His dual roles as brother and king collided with suffocating force. Inside, he felt pressure from the media, the royal family, and his own heart. Every breath weighed heavily, dragging him between duty and family. Camilla sat silently, observing each movement, each gesture of the other two. She said nothing, yet her presence was an invisible pressure, intensifying the room's tension. She was the shadow of authority, subtly shaping the space without a single word. Anne pressed on, her voice a mix of persuasion and frustration. We cannot only think about the royal family's image before the public. Family comes first. Andrew needs us now, in this dark night. She emphasized each word, leaving Charles no room for evasion. Charles shook his head slightly, eyes drifting toward the misted streetlights outside the window. He wanted to react, to rise, to speak that he understood, yet hesitation swallowed every word. His heart ached for his brother, but the king within reminded him that one misstep now could trigger a media storm of catastrophic proportions. Camilla finally spoke, her voice calm yet sharp, commanding immediate attention. We cannot let the media see the king leaving the palace at midnight just because someone no longer holds an official title. She paused, her gaze fixed on Charles, measuring his reaction. If we do, public perception will be skewed, and the royal family's image will suffer serious damage. Anne furrowed her brow, but didn't respond immediately. She sensed the cold pragmatism in Camilla's words, a perspective that clashed completely with the emotion and familial responsibility she carried. The atmosphere in the room was taut, every movement loaded with meaning and weight. Charles remained silent, fingers lightly interlaced, torn between his duty as a brother and Camilla's warning. He felt the intense inner conflict, heart and mind pulling him in two entirely different directions. Beads of sweat dotted his forehead as his eyes flicked toward Anne, then back to Camilla, as if searching for some miraculous solution. Finally, Anne rose, moving toward the window, hands gripping the wooden frame. She exhaled, voice trembling but resolute. I cannot sit by. This is family, not policy or image. She turned to Charles, eyes challenging, yet heavy with the pain of a sister. Camilla stood quietly, observing Anne and Charles. She understood that at this moment, power did not lie in words alone, but in the ability to guide others toward her will. Her presence in the room was more commanding than ever. She needed no raised voice, only the measured calm in her gaze. Charles sighed softly, eventually releasing his hands and giving a slight nod, though he still said nothing. Silence settled again, heavier than before. Anne remained still, her inner turmoil simmering. She knew that to persuade Charles, patience was required. But at this moment, patience only heightened her anxiety. Camilla stepped lightly to the table, placing her hand on the documents, eyes fixed on Charles. We need to decide now, not for sentiment or familial duty, but for the image of the royal family. One wrong move now will leave an indelible mark. Andrew a deep breath, eyes alight with determination. But we are talking about blood, about a person in need of his brother's care. None of us have the right to ignore that. Charles froze, looking at the two women before him. His chest tightened. Each passing minute, the tension in the room seemed ready to explode. Every glance, gesture, and word carried the weight of a decision yet to be made. At last, Camilla took a step back, still keeping her eyes on Charles. She needed not say another word. Her presence alone made it clear that the ultimate decision now rested with her. Though she was merely a shadow of power in the room, Anne stood motionless, face a mix of frustration and tension, realizing that no matter what she said, the final step would not be hers. Charles sank into his chair, eyes heavy, quietly staring at his hands. His hesitation was not just a choice between duty and family, but a test of power in his role within the monarchy. Every heartbeat, every breath stretched taut, counting down the seconds before a difficult decision that no one dared voice aloud. The room fell into silence once more, only the ticking of the clock, the soft rustle of paper, and the even breaths of the three people remaining. Pressure seemed to seep through the walls like a cold mist covering the entire palace. Anne gazed out the window, sensing the divide between heart and responsibility, between family loyalty and the crown. Camilla remained still, her figure alone but her authority unmistakable. She walked slowly, lightly as air. Yet every step left an imprint of power and decision. Anne and Charles remained seated, Anne with unspoken anger, Charles with tormented silence, knowing that whatever choice was made would leave a lasting mark. The next morning, while mist still cloaked Buckingham's gardens, the official statement was released. Brief, cold, and calculated. No extra words, no emotion, only the flat assertion of the reality the royal family wanted to convey. Prince Andrew is currently receiving medical care. The royal family appreciates the public's concern. The British public, accustomed to a royal family that appeared openly during health crises, were immediately stunned. The first reaction was long silence, followed by waves of outrage spreading from London to Edinburgh. From small alleys to upscale cafes, questions arose. Why wait until the next morning, more than 2 hours after the incident, to release official information? Why no word from the King or Queen Camilla to reassure the public? On social media, hashtags like Prince Andrew, Buckingham, and royal silence trended heavily. Comments of anger and confusion poured in. A family member is in critical condition, and they remain silent? Why didn't the king go himself? Is Camilla orchestrating everything behind the scenes? The public drew comparisons to the era of Queen Elizabeth II, when any family member faced a health crisis. She personally appeared, often in simple attire, but her presence reassured the nation. Now, her absence only amplified public frustration. British newspapers today all splash their front pages with headlines brimming with suspicion and criticism. An article in the Times read, "Camilla has turned Buckingham into a place of principle, where every decision must follow reason and formality, no longer a home where family bonds come first." The piece went on to compare the handling of situations under Queen Elizabeth II with today's approach, emphasizing that in the prestige, the royal family's direct care created warmth and closeness for the public, whereas now, the distance feels cold and insurmountable. The Guardian published a series of reader comments, many revealing deep disappointment. All they care about is making everything look official and perfect in the public eye. But Buckingham no longer holds the warmth of family. Another reader wrote, "If this is how they handle family matters, who can still believe the royal family is a model of responsibility and compassion?" These reactions did not remain mere dissatisfaction. They quickly became public pressure the royal family could no longer ignore. Meanwhile, international media commentary began to spread. CNN, BBC, and Sky News all covered the event, noting that maintaining silence at such a crucial moment was unprecedented in recent royal history. Analysts pointed out that if Andrew were an ordinary person, it might have gone unnoticed. But as a prince and a globally watched family member, the silence became a serious issue. The British public's outrage was coupled with intense curiosity about the palace's inner workings. Even the smallest details were dissected. Who informed the king? What role did Camilla play in deciding the statement? And Anne, who had requested the king visit the hospital, how did she feel seeing the matter reduced to a cold, impersonal statement? This curiosity turned public focus not only to Andrew, but to the entire royal apparatus, from King Charles and Camilla to Anne and their close advisors. Royal media experts observed that the statement had a clear purpose: to keep the royal family's image stable in the public eye, revealing no vulnerability. Yet this strategy backfired because the public expected warmth, family presence, and empathy. The coldness inadvertently symbolized the growing distance between the monarchy and the people, between the throne and the human heart. On radio shows and royal podcasts, commentators emphasized that this approach signaled a shift in palace principles. According to press reports and some analysts, Camilla has turned Buckingham into a place where power and protocol outweigh family sentiment. Every decision must be calculated for public perception, and the prolonged silence over Andrew's critical condition became a living testament to that. Social media reactions went further, contrasting today's monarchy with the values Queen Elizabeth II embodied: devotion, closeness, and always prioritizing family. This stark contrast fueled waves of outrage, skepticism, and disappointment, putting the royal family under unprecedented media pressure. The public scrutinized every movement of Charles, Camilla, and Anne. Every photo, every minor statement the following day was analyzed meticulously. The British press noted that the statement caused a major public stir, not just because of its content, but because of how it was delivered. Too brief, too cold, lacking humanity. Morning television discussions reached a peak, with commentators questioning whether Buckingham had become a place of dry principles, where power and protocol take precedence over family bonds and human duty. Analyses suggested that Camilla, wielding influence over internal decisions, might be reshaping how the royal family responds to crises, prioritizing image above all else. The British public inevitably compared this with Queen Elizabeth II, who always personally appeared during similar situations, regardless of time or conditions, to reassure both family and nation. This contrast highlighted the widening gap between today's monarchy and the traditional values the public once cherished. Across newspapers, social media, and television, the question lingered: does the royal family's silence and calculated approach risk eroding the approachable, familiar image the public once knew? The answer remained unclear. But one thing was certain: the terse, cold statement released this morning had ignited a public reaction the monarchy could not ignore, posing a major challenge for how they would handle future crises. Yet amid the storm of criticism, one figure quietly appeared at the hospital gates, requiring no cameras or ceremonial display. Night cloaked the quiet scene, with only dim streetlights and a thin mist brushing the cold stone walls. Charles emerged in a long gray coat, shoulders squared, walking slowly but deliberately. A trusted bodyguard followed at a respectful distance, enough to provide protection without intruding on the privacy of the moment. No motorcade, no spotlight, just two figures moving through the night, silently seeking calm amid the media tempest. The hospital doors opened slowly as Charles stepped inside. The night's chill seeped into his coat, but could not dim the faint light spilling from the interior lamps. The corridor leading to the intensive care unit was so silent that each step echoed like a reminder of time's fragility. Charles took a deep breath, gathering all his anxiety and inner conflict, determined not to disturb this crucial moment. When the hospital room door opened, Andrew lay in bed, frail and pale, yet his eyes still held that familiar sharpness. Charles stepped forward, leaning slightly, placing his hand over his brother's. There were no grand words, no ceremony, just a quiet presence, enough to fill the room with emotion. His voice was low, just audible to Andrew. "You've suffered enough, Andrew." Andrew looked up at his brother, eyes weary yet grateful. Only a few words, but they carried the weight of affection, care, and remorse for not being able to shield his brother from the pressures and judgments beyond these walls. Charles held Andrew's hand for a long moment, as if trying to capture every instant of family before returning to the obligations of the throne. Around them, no one else appeared. Only the soft light from the room's lamp fell across the brothers' faces, casting lines both solemn and tender. No cameras, no reporters, nothing to disturb this moment. Everything was quiet, leaving only sibling love, silent but potent, threading through the smallest details. A squeeze of the hand, a glance, a sigh. From a distance, Sarah Ferguson watched through the glass. She did not step in, unwilling to break the private moment, but her eyes were misted, a thin handkerchief pressed briefly to her face to wipe away the quiet tears falling. The scene was a reminder of a family that had endured countless trials, weathered storms of media scrutiny, yet still preserved the bonds of kinship. Sarah felt the weight of the moment, an event where reputation, power, and protocol could not compare to human connection. Charles lingered beside the bed, silently observing Andrew, committing every detail to memory. Each breath, each gesture of his brother became precious, and he knew these moments might be fleeting. The hospital room felt sacred in its utter stillness, just the two brothers and the quiet rhythm of their hearts under the dim night light. Charles said nothing more, holding Andrew's hand, letting his presence convey the encouragement words could not. The moment stretched on, heavy yet warm. Charles could not undo the years of hardship Andrew had endured, but he could be there, a reminder that family remained, that love persisted despite the storm of public scrutiny and media glare. When Charles left the room, walking quietly down the hospital corridor, he maintained the same hushed dignity. The bodyguard followed at a respectful distance, honoring the private moment's conclusion. No pomp, no spotlights, just the quiet passage of a brother, a king, navigating the tension between duty and feeling. Outside, mist still blanketed the hospital grounds. The chill crept into every corner, but it could not diminish the warmth held inside that room. Sarah Ferguson remained, watching Charles's silhouette fade, moved and aware that this would be one of the family's most unforgettable memories. Meanwhile, Camilla sat alone in Buckingham's vast office. The soft yellow glow from a desk lamp highlighted her sharp, cold features. She said nothing, unmoved, but every gesture radiated absolute authority and control. Everything around her, newspapers, phone messages, notes from advisors, was considered carefully before action. She knew that in the royal family, even a moment of vulnerability could shatter a legacy built over generations. Looking through the list of recent events, Andrew's image surfaced in her mind, not with compassion, but with stark awareness. Every action, every word could trigger unpredictable waves of media attention. His past scandals had shaken Buckingham. Camilla had advocated restricting, even cutting off, his public engagements to preserve protocol and royal image. Now, with his illness, she let no personal emotion influence decisions. Every message, every call from guards or advisors was analyzed coldly, as if commanding an unseen battle. Her distance from Andrew was not indifference, but caution. Any gesture of sympathy or weakness could be exploited by the press, even in silence. Camilla observed everything: the light into the corridor, the footsteps of passers-by, the chairs arranged in perfect order, all reflecting the power and discipline she maintained without compromise. Yet, at times in that room, Camilla felt profound loneliness. Power and discipline placed her at the top of decision-making, but isolated her from the natural stirrings of human emotion. No one to share with, no laughter, no comfort, only cold calculation and the solitude of standing between heart and throne. She knew every action tonight mattered, not for Andrew, not for Charles, but for the monarchy. Every leak, every public gaze could shift the balance of power. Camilla controlled it all, Yet she was the loneliest in the vast room where emotion had no place, only authority and discipline. At dawn in Windsor, mist still clung to the rooftops. Birds sang near the eaves, and the first sunlight filtered through the hospital window, illuminating Andrew's weary but alert face. Though weakened by the night's ordeal, he held Sarah Ferguson's hand tightly, finding a small measure of peace amidst turbulent days. The public outside continued to ask questions. Could this be a sign that the old era of Windsor was coming to an end? Andrew's health was declining. Charles faced mounting stress, and Anne's dissatisfaction with the palace's decisions was becoming increasingly apparent. A close insider revealed. After this incident, the relationship between Camilla and Anne is almost shattered. Though unconfirmed officially, these words sparked serious speculation among royal observers about the future and the balance of power within the family. Charles quietly sent a bouquet to the hospital, accompanied by a small card. Family is always the place to return to, no matter the storms. That simple gesture seemed to underscore that, even amidst power and duty, throne and in protocol, there remained moments of pure familial connection. The peaceful morning, combined with Andrew's slow, steady breathing, created a striking contrast to the chaotic night before. All the tension, all the conflicts, all the calculations of power temporarily receded, giving way to care, compassion, and the possibility of forgiveness. Inside the hospital room, Andrew gazed out the window, sunlight falling on a face still marked by fatigue but filled with hope. Sarah gently held his hand, and together they shared a quiet understanding that, even within the cold corridors of the palace or amid the maneuvers of power, there was still space for humanity and family. These simple moments, without pomp, without ceremony, were precisely what gave true meaning to the idea of royal family.